Is Donald Trump afraid of Netanyahu? If so, is that because of Epstein files or something beyond that?
He's afraid of the Epstein files. So is Bill Ackman. Bill Ackman was an Epstein associate through his wife, Neri Oxman, who was gifted $150,000 through her lab at MIT. She's a designer and architect, this really pretentious designer. And she gave Bill Ackman an orb, an artistic orb as a gift afterwards, and kept it secret because MIT kept all of Epstein's gifts secret. And that came out in the media, and Ackman was furious. So all of these people have these connections to Epstein, and they're afraid of it. But what Trump is afraid of is Netanyahu's ruthlessness and clear insanity. I mean, I'm hearing from people who are like peripheral to the Trump administration that they thought Netanyahu coming out on his own and volunteering that he did not kill Charlie Kirk was insane and that he's losing his mind. But I mean, if you look at what Netanyahu's doing regionally, he's carrying out a regional assassination campaign, killing everyone who gets in his way. They tried to kill the entire Hamas negotiating team inside a U.S. ally. Trump did not like that. But what did Trump do to push back against that? What did Trump do when Israel notified him in advance of the attack? Nothing. There's nothing Trump will do to get in Netanyahu's way. And that's because Donald Trump is afraid of what Netanyahu would do to him. And so I've said this on other podcasts, and I wrote this, I reported this. The Trump administration, through the Secret Service, discovered 2 electronic devices on Secret Service emergency response vehicles this year. Around the time of Netanyahu's visits, they're planted by Israeli agents. That's according to a very good Trump insider source. Now, I probably wouldn't have reported it because I can't corroborate that with the Secret Service. I don't have like some deep source inside the Secret Service. And so if I asked their PR department, their comms team, they would say, no, we can't comment on that. But there's a precedent here. In 2019, 3 former U.S. officials, senior officials from the Trump administration, confirmed to Politico, one of the most mainstream outlets in the U.S., run by the pro-Israel Axel Springer company, that Israel had planted Stingray devices in and around the White House to spy on Donald Trump's phone communications. We know that Tony Blair, when he took his team to Israel, would tell them to not bring their talk on their phones or have sensitive discussions in government cars because they would be spied on. And Boris Johnson, former British Prime Minister, wrote in his own memoirs in 2017 that Netanyahu himself went to his personal toilet, and afterwards, Johnson's security team found a listening device in his personal toilet. So Netanyahu himself was planting surveillance devices, according to Johnson. And then it makes you wonder, like, who could get access to the White House to plant Stingray devices? It's not like any Mossad agent can just get in there. It's someone who has to be let in the White House in the first place. So this is very serious, and it would be rational of Donald Trump to be afraid of someone who has that much influence over him, who's carrying out assassinations inside U.S. allies, who's even weaponized, whose Mossad intelligence services is weaponizing household devices as bombs, and who has killed who has incited the assassination of his chief political rival, Yitzhak Rabin, who was assassinated for signing the Oslo Accords. Also remember that Netanyahu's first boss in Israeli politics, Yitzhak Shamir, was one of the authors of the assassination of Volky Bernadotte, who was the UN special liaison to Palestine in charge of implementing Resolution 194 to bring back the Palestinian refugees. So they shot him in Jerusalem as he was getting out of his car as part of the Stern Gang, the armed wing of what would become the Likud party. That was Netanyahu's mentor. So assassination has fueled Netanyahu's rise to power. And now Netanyahu is the first foreign leader that I've ever seen go out on his own on not 1, but 2 occasions to declare that he has not assassinated a top U.S. conservative leader or a leader in general who was under pressure from the Israel lobby in the days before his death.
Max, you mentioned the final goal of Netanyahu is a war with Iran, a full out war,
Yeah.
something big between the United States and Iran, not Israel, because they want the United States to fight the war. What is your understanding of the latest comment by the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs? He said that the new axis of evil is Turkey and Syria and Qatar. This is a new sort of mindset forming in the aftermath of Bashar al-Assad and what has happened in Syria.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, we need to consider that in the past week, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who is in control of more national security cabinet level positions than anyone since Henry Kissinger, and is more powerful than the Vice President J.D. Vance, was summoned to Jerusalem essentially to kiss the wall with a kippah on his head alongside reciprocal Israeli U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, the Christian Zionist fanatic. And that to me signaled I saw that as a harbinger of doom, in the same way that I saw Netanyahu's last 2 visits to Washington as part of a campaign to get Donald Trump to sign off on his imminent or his desire to attack Iran. Now we're learning through transcripts of discussions between Israeli officials in the National Security Cabinet, including Eyal Zamir, the chief of staff, that the Israelis would not have launched their unprovoked attack on Iran in June without knowing that the Trump administration would ultimately come in and strike the Fordo and Isfahan facilities. They knew that going in. And so Trump was going to rescue them potentially from a war they couldn't finish on their own. And so it seems clear to me, given that they basically have Trump by the balls, that sometime before the midterms, the congressional midterms, where the Republicans are expected to lose, Israel will attempt to attack Iran again and instigate another more violent war, which will draw the U.S. in more deeply. But we're also hearing these comments about Turkey and Qatar because of the fear that they could reestablish some sort of influence inside Syria, and also their efforts regionally to push back on Israel politically. And many people miss this, but many observers miss this, but Israel actually attacked a de facto Turkish base inside Syria about 10 days ago in Palmyra, where Turkey was seeking to professionalize the Syrian military. So Israel's recognizing, with the new imposed government in Damascus, which was always a Turkish and Qatari card, as they controlled the various al-Qaeda offshoots, Jabhat al-Nusra, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that this has given armed capacity to Turkey on the frontiers of Israel along the Golan. And so they're going to turn up the temperature on Turkey and fight what they call a war between wars inside Syria. We should also pay attention to Egypt, which controls the Rafah crossing, which is the main point of exit where Gaza's war-torn, starving, genocided refugees are supposed to exit in order to make the so-called Gaza Riviera plan possible, basically the Judaization of Gaza possible. And Egypt militantly opposes this. At the recent summit convened by Qatar, these summits are usually useless meetings in air-conditioned halls where Palestinians are being ethnically cleansed. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi made some interesting comments where he announced that it was a red line for Palestinians to be pushed into the Sinai, that the Sinai would become a base of operations against Israel, which would mean the conflict would come to Egypt, and that he will mobilize the Egyptian military in opposition to this, which is technically, I think, a violation of the Camp David Accords. And this is the last Arab army that is strong in the region, that is actually bringing in some important Chinese technology. that has decent air defenses. So I think potential conflict with Egypt is on the horizon as well, and that we should actually pay attention to the conference that Qatar just held. And I mentioned before Israel being banned from the European Football Association. That was one of the key items on Qatar's agenda. So this is not just a military war, but a political war. And finally, just some trivia. There are 3 of Qatar's top lobbyists in the US in the Trump administration in key positions. Kash Patel was a lobbyist for Qatar. Pam Bondi was the top lobbyist for Qatar at Ballard Partners, and she's the attorney general. And Lee Zeldin at the Environmental Protection Agency was one of the pro-Israel influencers close to Trump that got on the Qatari payroll in 2017 when Saudi Arabia laid siege to Qatar, and Qatar thought, if we groom these pro-Israel figures close to Trump, then maybe Trump will push back on the Saudis. And they were sort of correct about that. So that's another reason why Qatar threatens Israel, because they do have influence within Washington that a country like Iran, because of sanctions and because of its historical position, could never have had.